So, without further ado, I would like to announce the first speaker of tonight. He is, well, can I call you a nerd, Kai? I think I can do so. Kai is an urban analyst, and if you want to find out what that means, listen to his talk. Kai van Hasselt.
Thank you all. Is it on? Yeah, good. Thank you all for the invitation. Switch this. And then my slides. I'm going to tell you about the Global South, and I'm going to make an argument why I think it's important to know about the Global South. I'll do it in approximately 38 slides, and I'll do that in 20 minutes. What should I tell you about my background? I studied here, also in this vicinity, at the economics department, and later on urban planning, just across the water. I worked as a trend watcher, which I think is in itself not an nerdy occupation, but I did it very intensely, maybe that makes it more nerdy. I worked briefly at the architecture firm of Rem Koolhaas, who's also very focused on his work. I would not call him a nerd. And then in 2004, I founded my... Yes? And then in 2004, I founded my own firm. It does two things. One is urban strategies, so look at trends and how cities change and develop and what they can learn of each other. The other thing is cultural intelligence, and cultural intelligence is either intelligent stuff about culture or contemporary art, or, and that brings it closer to this topic, cultural intelligence is about, let's say, intelligence in the sense of the CIA or the FBI, but then not for governments, but when a company wants to know something about the local culture, I go there and check that out. So that was my coolest job. In 2007, I went to Kazakhstan, and as a kind of reverse Borat mission, I went to discover the true culture of Kazakhstan and explained that to Lord Foster, a British architect, so that they could build luxury villas, which they didn't because of the financial crisis. So that was exciting, and we worked on that with great pleasure. Now, back to the topic of tonight, the Global South. You see a big red line, and that is the equator. But for my talk, I'm going to move that equator a little bit. That's good for the argument, because I'm going to argue that the Global South, which technically is all the countries south of the equator, that is sort of a major important thing to know about the Global South and all those countries. Well, a little bit wider notion of the Global South includes many, or most countries in Africa, South America, and Asia. I think not everybody in Asia is happy with being part of the Global South, but for tonight, we're going to say that they're part of it. And the Global South, you could say, is a kind of alternative to the West. Maybe you remember a couple of years ago, there was all of a sudden the word BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And people at a big bank, Goldman Sachs, said, you should know about the BRICS, because the BRICS is big, it's the new thing, it's going to overtake the Western world. The BRICS is kind of, it's only 4 countries, then they came up with something else which was called Next 11, 11 new countries. But I'm doing a proposition tonight, and that proposition is forget about BRICS, forget about the Next 11, focus on the Global South. It's going to happen in these countries, and it's not only about, and that's maybe my economic background, it's not only about understanding that it's a bigger market and that people there are going to earn more money, but especially it's about getting to know the culture. You can do that when you're there on holiday, you can do that for your work, but I think it's a major shift, and well, I'm going to show some of the things that happen when you look at the Global South. So we're talking about this part of the world, and then if you flip that, you get that. I think that's kind of like a Rorschach test, and it's also meant to be in a way to check what is the reality of the Global South and what are your expectations of it. this image, which I didn't make, which I found on the internet, is actually the biggest hit of my website. I got the most hits than people look for the upside down world or the global south. They all find this image. And I think it is indeed a very interesting image because it makes you aware how very different the world is if you look at it upside down. And that in itself makes you aware that, yeah, who's upside down? It's only from our Western perspective that it's upside down. And you could argue that this is the world. In 1943, there was an artist from Uruguay, in Montevideo, Torres Garcia, and he made this little drawing. And this little drawing was a paradigm shift, because it was for the first time that South America, the continent, could see itself not as the sort of little southern sister of North America, but that the South Pole was on top, that it was all about the Polo del Sur. And he made this drawing, but still, if you now, and I did it earlier in the week, if you now Google for South America, it's still sort of the orthodoxy, the mainstream is still, South America looks like this. For my point, for my argument, I will work with that mainstream map, but it can be critiqued, but I'm going to take my argument from here. What I did, and I brought a lot of, 100 of these, for those of you later on who are interested, I made a New Year's map, New Year's card, and this New Year's card shows 9 cities and 9 topics, and we compared them. And I did that with my employee, Sven, who's sitting over there. And we made this map, and because not all the images are as sharp as you might want them, you get this in the end. And we looked at all different kind of topics. So, how's it going on with luxury? How's it going on with landscape? How's it going on with, let's say, art or food or culture or public infrastructure or the roads? And what you see is that the global south is not, just like the west, is not one thing. It's a very broad culture. But it's also, and I think that's important, it's very often different than you might expect. Well, where did I find my inspiration? I found my inspiration, and this maybe is nerdy. When I was a kid, I worked at a Japanese print shop. And Hiroshige, who's a very famous Japanese printmaker, made this print in 1833 about the 53 stations of the Tokaido, and that's like an important road in Japan. And I took that 53 stations as my inspiration for the 81 impressions. So, now I want to do a little game. I'll name you the 9 cities which I spoke, or which I researched, namely Seoul, but also Mumbai, and Singapore, and Kampala, and Nairobi, Johannesburg, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, and Santiago. And now, what I want is maybe an intelligent guess where these 2 images, and they are from one city, where they could have been taken. Any guesses? Wild guesses?
Mumbai.
I'm hearing Santiago. What else am I hearing?
Nairobi.
Nairobi? Why Nairobi? Yeah, that's true. There's a mountain. Is that Mount Kilimanjaro? Maybe. Well, the image comes from Santiago. And on the visit to Santiago, I was surprised because I felt it deeply capitalistic. And I must also say I found it the most efficient city or country in South America. But the police, in a way, looked like the army. The army sort of headquarters was the most important building of the city. And it felt just not so long ago, since 1973, unfortunately. It's also an innovative country because I found this combination of a coffee and a chocolate mousse, which was a drink. I was deeply impressed with that, and it tastes good. And I found, and my work is a lot about shopping malls, so I also found many outdoor shopping malls. Too many, if you ask my girlfriend. We find a lot. Then, another one. India or Uganda? And then I want hands first for India. India, who thinks this was from India? And from Uganda? Ah, that's a good guess. What I like in Kampala, and what I found interesting, is that you have this sort of, you see on the one hand, you have all these buildings that the Chinese are building. It's actually a South African bank, which is starting up branches all over the continent. And you have these traditional taxi vans that you see in many African cities. But how this city mixes together the very traditional and the increasingly modern in a very rapid pace is fascinating. Also, what you could see here is that you could get excellent Indian food in Kampala. But that this is a bad image, but what you can see here is one house is totally painted yellow, and the other one is totally painted pink, and that house is that's the advertisement for the two big local mobile phone companies. So instead of, they just paint all the houses in the color of the phone company. Then, just to get you an idea, how do I do my work? Sometimes you look at a regional comparison. For example, you look at what's happening in urbanism in South America. So you compare how do they go along with the streets, how's the landscape, how's the public infrastructure. So you have a look at the region. Other time, you compare that, how's this looking in Africa? But it can also be, and then I think it becomes more interesting, if you have a kind of nuanced, you need a kind of nuanced perspective, because if you compare three cities, Nairobi, Kampala, and Joburg in Africa, you sort of, your gut feeling, or I think it's all a bit like each other, doesn't work. Because when it comes to culture, you have, for example, yes, in Nairobi, you have let's say, the pastiche or the cliché, and maybe you can even say the bad art. But you also have the Nakumatt, which is a super sophisticated supermarket chain. This is the leading chain of Eastern Africa. And those things, they exist in parallel, in very close proximity to each other. There is 200 meters between this picture and this picture. Going south in Johannesburg, you have this place, and if you ever go to Johannesburg, you should visit it. It's called Arts on Main. It's in the middle of the downtown area, which was not a pleasant place to be. And a local real estate developer bought up old factories and started this arts cluster here, with a restaurant and a gallery and a bar. But I would say it's one of the best art places now in the whole world. And I think you would not expect to find that in Johannesburg. Well, now, a new guess. Who has been here, or who knows of these 9 cities where this was? Who wants to do gut feeling? Which of the 3 continents? Asia. Why Asia? Is that stereotyping? It is indeed Asia. It's the city of Seoul. And what they did is, imagine that this used to be a really big highway, right through the middle of the city center. And the old mayor took it down, and he planted this kind of green waterway right through the city. And that was a new thing and a cool thing to do, because in Seoul there's not a tradition of public parks. The only one who had her own park was the emperor or the empress. She had her sort of imperial garden, but only she could walk around it. So this is a new thing, and it's very popular, as you can see. And I want to show it to you, because sometimes and that's also part of my work, somebody, a developer or an architect, he wants to know the best practices. He or she only wants to know about landscapes or about supermarkets. So then you compare all these examples, and you try to offer a new idea, building up a sort of continuum on what already is there. Well, if you look at the skyline, you see that the horizon in the global south is showing increasingly the same. And I would argue that a lot of people don't like this, that they would call this the bad side of globalization. If you're not a fan of shopping, or even if you are a fan of shopping, you might think, well, all these shopping centers everywhere, all these malls, that's also looking alike. But here I would argue that increasingly now, in the global south, the shopping centers are more interesting than in the west. So I always tell my clients that don't look at the United States, which you might think is the best country for shopping centers or malls, but look here, look to Seoul, or look in this case to, this is Kibera, This is the biggest slum of Nairobi, and it's an interesting shoe shop, except for 3 times a day. Then the train passes by, and the shoes go away, and then they are set out again. But 5 miles along the street in Nairobi, yes, in a posh neighborhood, you find this mall, or this is again Seoul, one of the coolest malls I know on the planet. Or here in Buenos Aires, again, posh area, but they know how to build shopping centers. Well, sometimes, this was one of my favorites. It was the topic of the comparison was display, and I compared what kind of, sort of how people display their goods. And what is often the most interesting when you look at display is how people display that you cannot do something somewhere. So an example, this is an example again from Kenya. The Harambee House is a corruption-free zone, just so you know. Or here, Johannesburg, big bridge, the Nelson Mandela Bridge, and you're not allowed to sell goods from that bridge. They're very serious about that. Then, my last topic is about luxury. Luxury is something that I kind of find fascinating. If you go to the global south, you see a lot of luxury, you see a lot of new wealth, you see a lot of rich people, and they are seeking where to spend my money, and shops are building a lot of luxury shops for them. But that made me also think of, sometimes they say don't let the genie out of the bottle, but in this case I was thinking more like genie as the other genie, namely genie the sort of the metrics to show how how much inequality there is in a country. And that made me again think of that global south image. Now I take it as a real Rorschach test, and it's sort of a good evil, or sort of a good spirit or an evil spirit that's developing in the global south. And if you then look at all that luxury, I also think a bit it's a point to worry about, that wealth is not sort of being spread out in the best way. So that's something to watch for in the global south. But for example, here Mr. Ambani, one of the 2 richest men of India, both brothers. One lives, sort of the senior brother lives, I think, more here. The junior brother lives more there. They don't speak with each other. They build a house for $1 billion. The mama is still alive. The father is dead and gave the business empire to 2 of them. And they are not on speaking terms. So somewhere in this building there are 2 elevators, and they take separate elevators. Well, those are fascinating stories from India, from the global south, I think. Another one that I think is interesting is, for example, in Seoul, in South Korea, the sort of tremendous love for patisserie, which makes Paris almost like a cake country, but not the diehards for patisserie as you find them in Seoul, in this bakery. So there's all those things to discover. For those of you who want that, there's one of these, then you can look better at the pictures, and I'm interested to hear from you which ones you pick out and that you think, oh, that's a pastiche, or that's something I didn't know, or that picture is, sparks my curiosity. With that I end, and I end my plea with a sort of a call to focus on the global south. Either it is in your work or in your study, in your private life or in your private life, but engage with it, deal with it, because the global south is here to stay. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kai. I'm just wondering, first of all, what is genie?
Genie is the, how should I say, it's the official way to compare how big the inequality in the country is. So in the United States there's a big debate about Gini, because it was for maybe 30 or 40 years not so high as it is now. But in the global south this is also a big topic.
It's like an index number.
Yes, it's an index.
Okay. And also, was it Niger that you took out? Why did you take that out of Africa?
What?
Why did you take Niger out of Africa?
How do you mean?
Was it, can you switch back to your map? Was it? Is that, there's a hole in Africa?
There's a hole
in Africa?
Yeah, well we should look should go all the way back to discover where that hole comes from. We have not been photoshopping with Africa, so...
Yeah, it's really, look at Niger. Just down, and then the next one. Just switch to your next slide.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Sven. Cornell of Niger.
Okay. So that's the big mystery, the Easter egg of your presentation. So what I'll do is I'll pass these down, and I can imagine there are other questions, and I'll also hand this microphone to the audience.
Hello there. Very interesting talk. I guess my question really is what is your main business model? Is it like mining the South for new ideas, or is it providing intelligence for your clients to develop in the South?
I would say it's the second, and my sort of 95% of my clients now come from the West. So, but I got once, I did a workshop at the University of Johannesburg, so I got 300 euros for that, and I was already really proud that I got my money from Africa and not get money from the West to do stuff in Africa. No, I should focus on the second.
So you talked about you talked about the global South, and I heard, yeah, I'm here, sorry.
Yes, sir.
So I usually hear about the US versus China, and then people try to make predictions of when China will beat the US as being the world major economy. So if you look into sort of the West and the global South, or maybe the North versus South, when does the global South will beat the West as the major economy?
Ooh, that's an economics number.
Basically, when do we have to move?
Well, I think basically that you should move right away, but then you're hedging yourself against that moment. I'm not sure if I would include China in the global South, and I think that's the biggest question. If you put China in, it's probably 7 years, and if you put China out, it's going to take a long while.
Yes, I wondered if the global South is nerdy in any way. Could you expand on that?
I think it all depends on how much you're focused on it, how deep you go into the global South.
Did you meet any nerds there?
Yes, at the University of Nairobi and also at the University of Johannesburg.
Is there a nerd night over there? I should know that. I know there was a nerd night for a short while in Thailand, but I think that got cancelled, I don't know, because they kind of misbehaved. I don't know. Maybe it's just the own spirit of the global South that was reflected there. One last question? Here.
You talked about BRIC countries, but whatever happened to the phrase "the third world country," the third world countries? That really got out of fashion, and you don't hear anybody talking about that anymore.
Well, in a way, I think there are two arguments to be made. I think the third world, what we used to call the third world countries, that they don't call themselves the third world countries. And if you look now what's happening in economics or in finance, it's actually the formerly third world countries that are helping Europe. So we are the new third world, and we don't want to be called like that, so we are smart enough to don't call others like that.
And what's the second?
Second world, well, I think for a long time the second world was large parts of Asia, and now they're just called, they used to call them emerging countries or emerging markets, and now they don't even call them that, they just call them growth countries, because there is growth and we just sit steady or decline.
Or could you say that the whole concept of the third world was with the Cold War? It died out in 89 to 91. The first world was the West, the second world was the Communist Warsaw Pact, and the third world were the unaligned nations that they were trying to ally with. So it died out about 20 years
Yeah.
ago, the idea of the third world.
Yes, that's completely true.
So on that positive note, I would like to thank Kai again for his talk.
The lower day is nice. You just move the...
Yeah, I noticed. Maybe it's to make the eyes in the Rorschach picture a bit more. Maybe there's some psychologist involved in this.